There is a quiet ache that visits us in the moments we expect to feel most fulfilled. It comes not in failure, but after we succeed. It slips in when we should feel complete, and instead feel strangely untouched by our own accomplishments. You may have climbed the ladder only to find it leaned against the wrong wall. You may have achieved everything you were told would matter, and yet feel haunted by a vague sense of absence, like a story left unfinished deep within you. This ache is not a flaw, it is a signal. It is the soul's way of reminding us that fulfillment cannot be manufactured. That meaning is not measured by applause or titles, but by resonance with something eternal inside us. There are people who have everything the world says should satisfy them and still wake up feeling hollow. Their outer life is full, but their inner life is starved. This is not a failure of success. It is a failure of meaning. We were not born to simply achieve. We were born to remember, to touch something greater than ourselves, to live a life that feels real from the inside out. This is why the ache exists. Not to torment, but to awaken. We live in a time where everything can be optimized except the soul. People master productivity, performance, and presentation, yet quietly suffer from a sense that none of it truly matters. This is the epidemic no one talks about. You can be admired by thousands and still feel unseen by yourself. You can succeed in every visible way and still feel like your life lacks gravity. When you do not know what gives life meaning, even joy begins to feel weightless. The world rewards outcomes, but meaning does not come from results. It comes from contact with the real. When life feels like a performance, the soul begins to retreat. What remains is the shell of success without the spark of significance. This is not a problem we can fix with more goals. It is not a question we can answer with better habits. It is a hunger that nothing external can satisfy. A hunger for a deeper connection to who we are and why we are here. The ache persists because it is sacred. It is the soul knocking. It is trying to remind us that a life filled with motion can still be empty unless it moves in the direction of meaning. What gives life meaning is not a question we ask once and answer forever. It is a question that echoes through every season of existence. It rises after love is lost, after success is gained, after routines grow silent and time stretches long. It is the question that pierces through distraction when the noise fades. It emerges not in philosophy class, but in grief, in solitude, in the strange hollowness after dreams come true. It is the question that will not leave us alone, because it is the doorway to who we really are. Carl Jung believed that without meaning, life becomes unbearable. Not because we lack comfort, but because the soul cannot thrive in a vacuum. Meaning is the oxygen of the inner world. Without it, even pleasure becomes numb and even hope begins to flicker. We can survive without meaning, but we cannot live without it. We can build a life without it, but it will not feel like our own. Until this question is faced, something essential remains missing. Not outside us, but within. This is not a question we must answer with words. It is a question we must live. And to live it, we must first turn inward and listen for a voice deeper than the mind. A voice that speaks not in facts but in images, not in arguments but in symbols. Purpose is a direction. Meaning is a dimension. You can have purpose and still feel lost. You can wake up every day with tasks and still go to sleep with emptiness. Purpose can guide action. Meaning gives life to the one acting. Purpose often comes from the outside. It is what society praises, what culture rewards, what others recognize. Meaning does not come from applause. It comes from resonance. It is when something in your life touches something eternal in your soul. Purpose can be assigned. Meaning must be revealed. You can choose a purpose, but you must uncover meaning. It arrives not by planning, but by encountering. Not by designing your life, but by allowing life to speak back. Carl Jung understood this distinction clearly. He knew that a person can be efficient and still be hollow. That a life full of goals can still be devoid of soul. Meaning is not found in the structure of life, but but in its depth. When purpose becomes disconnected from meaning, it becomes mechanical. You become a machine with a mission, but no music. Meaning is the song underneath the structure. It is what makes purpose human. Carl Jung did not believe meaning could be handed to us. He believed it must emerge through a direct and often unsettling confrontation with the self. Not the self we show the world, but the deeper self that holds the totality of who we are. The self includes what we know and what we have forgotten. It contains our dreams, our fears, our shadows, and our highest potentials. It is the center of the psyche, not the surface. It is not created. It is discovered. Meaning is born when we contact with that deeper self, not when we perform, but when we turn inward. Not when we succeed, but when we surrender to what is real inside us, no matter how unpolished or unfamiliar. This encounter is rarely easy. It often begins in crisis. It often feels like losing everything we thought we were, but Jung knew that such disorientation is sacred. It strips away illusion so that truth can speak. The self does not give us answers, it gives us symbols. It gives us dreams. It gives us images that disturb and inspire. It does not explain, it invites. And through this invitation, meaning begins to emerge from the silence. The unconscious is not a landfill for forgotten memories. It is the womb of meaning. It holds the images, impulses, and intuitions that shape us from behind the veil of awareness. It is the place where life speaks before we are ready to hear. Jung understood that the unconscious is not passive. It is active. It is constantly forming symbols, generating dreams, creating patterns that reveal what our surface life cannot express. It is the hidden half of the soul's conversation with the world. To ignore the unconscious is to amputate half of our intelligence. It is to silence the voice that carries the wisdom of our ancestry, the power of our instincts, and the mystery of our destiny. It is to live on the surface of a depthless life. When we engage the unconscious through dreamwork, through art, through reflection, we do not control it. We enter into relationship with it. And in that relationship, meaning begins to unfold not as something imposed, but as something revealed. The unconscious does not care about our goals. It cares about our wholeness. It does not reward performance. It seeks integration. And when we begin to honor its voice, life stops being a puzzle and starts becoming a path. Individuation is not self-improvement. It is not the polishing of the ego or the decoration of personality. It is the slow, often painful unfolding of the soul's unique pattern through the terrain of real life. It is the journey toward becoming inwardly whole. Carl Jung used the word individuation to describe the process by which a person becomes who they truly are. This is not about becoming better. It is about becoming real. It is about allowing the different parts of the psyche to speak, to integrate, and to transform. This path does not follow a linear map. It moves through contradiction. It demands honesty. It asks us to face the parts of ourselves we avoid, and to recognize the sacred potential in what we once called weakness. Individuation is the story the soul wants to live. It is the inner compass that pulls us toward experiences that shape us, break us, and eventually reveal us. It cannot be rushed. It cannot be faked. It must be lived from the inside out. To individuate is to say yes to a life that makes sense beyond logic. It is to follow a thread you did not create, but were born holding. And when you walk that thread, meaning begins to appear not as an idea, but as a lived reality. There is a deeper intelligence within us that does not crave perfection. It longs for wholeness. It pulls us not toward polished images, but toward truth. This pull is not always comfortable. It often leads us into shadow, contradiction, and paradox. But it is always toward the center of who we are. The soul does not want us to be flawless. It wants us to be complete. That means including what we hide. It means bringing light to what we fear. It means embracing the unlived aspects of ourselves with tenderness rather than judgment. This call is not loud. It comes as a whisper. It arrives in dreams, in doubts, in longings that do not fit into the stories we tell about success. It appears in moments when life feels misaligned, not because we are failing, but because we are drifting from the truth of our being. To follow this call is to return. It is to walk home through unfamiliar ground. It is to shed the masks that once kept us safe but now keep us stuck. And as we walk, meaning begins to grow like roots beneath our feet. Wholeness does not mean harmony. It means inclusion. It means living in relationship with all parts of ourselves, even the ones we were taught to reject. This is where the compass points. And when we follow it, life begins to feel honest. It begins to feel real. Meaning does not arrive as a lightning strike. It does not shout its name from the sky. It does not come in a single moment of clarity. It emerges slowly as we follow the thread of our deepest questions, our hardest truths, and our most persistent longings. You cannot chase meaning like a prize. You cannot trap it with logic or force it into form. It is not something we grasp. It is something we respond to. It appears when we begin to walk in the direction our soul has been pointing toward all along. Sometimes the way is dark. Sometimes it makes no sense to the mind. But the heart knows when a path is right, even if it looks wrong to others. That quiet knowing is how meaning begins to bloom, not in certainty, but in sincerity. Meaning reveals itself in pieces, in patterns, in symbols, in dreams that return and moments that stop us, in choices we cannot explain but feel compelled to make. It is not found in a map. It is found in movement. To follow meaning is to walk by inner light. It is to trust that life has more to say than we have learned to hear. It is to believe that our pain has purpose, that our joy has direction, and that our story is not random but sacred. Suffering does not automatically create meaning, but it always creates an opening. It strips away the false and reveals what is essential. When everything else falls silent, the soul begins to speak. Not with answers, but with presence. We spend much of life trying to avoid pain. We see it as an enemy, a problem to solve, a flaw in the system. But pain is not always a mistake. Sometimes it is the very condition that awakens us to what matters most. Carl Jung did not romanticize suffering. He endured it. He faced it. He walked through it with eyes wide open. He understood that suffering becomes meaningful only when we allow it to speak, when we stop resisting and start listening. When we face pain symbolically, it transforms. It stops being just something that happened to us and becomes something that shapes us. The wound becomes a doorway. The loss becomes a teacher. The breakdown becomes a path. Meaning emerges not when we avoid suffering, but when we meet it with reverence. When we let it break the shell of the ego and touch the deeper self, that is when suffering becomes sacred. That is when pain becomes part of the story of becoming. After breaking with Freud, Carl Jung did not retreat into theory. He descended into himself. For years he entered a kind of waking dream, recording visions and conversations that defied reason. He called this period his confrontation with the unconscious. What emerged was not madness, it was revelation. Out of this darkness came the Red Book, a sacred journal filled with archetypal images, dialogues with inner figures, and mythic visions. It was not written for publication. It was created to survive. Jung did not seek suffering. He answered it. He allowed the collapse of identity to become a passage. He let go of certainty and entered the unknown. In that space, meaning did not arrive as theory. It arrived as symbol, image, and living presence. He faced his own shadow, not with judgment, but with curiosity. He entered into relationship with the terrifying and the beautiful aspects of his inner world. And through that relationship, a deeper wholeness began to form. The Red Book was not just a personal journal, it was a map. It revealed what happens when we stop running from the darkness and begin to treat it as a source of meaning. Jung walked through the fire, not around it. And because he did, he emerged with something the world still draws from today. Pain reduces us to essentials. It burns away distractions. It forces us to stop pretending. In that space of rawness, something ancient stirs. Not an answer, but a symbol. Not a solution, but a new way of seeing. When we suffer, we stand at a threshold. The old story no longer works. The roles we played begin to dissolve. What once gave us identity no longer gives us peace. Pain opens a crack in the ego. Through that crack, soul begins to enter. Jung saw that suffering becomes transformational only when we relate to it symbolically. That means we stop asking what is wrong with us and begin asking what this pain is trying to reveal. Not in words, but in image. Not in logic, but in myth. The symbolic attitude changes everything. It invites us to see pain as a message, not just a malfunction. As part of the soul's narrative, not just a break in the body's rhythm. It invites us to stop reacting and start attending. Pain becomes sacred when we let it speak. When we stop silencing it with distraction or numbing it with control. When we hold it with reverence and let it lead us somewhere we never thought we could go. Some wounds do not close because they were never meant to. They remain open not to torment us, but to keep us listening. They become portals, thresholds between what we were and what we are becoming. In the language of the soul, the wound is not an end. It is a beginning. Jung saw that the places where we hurt most deeply are often the very places where life is trying to enter. The wound draws our attention. It interrupts the surface narrative. It forces a confrontation with what lies beneath the mask. When we approach the wound as a womb, we begin to see pain not as destruction, but as initiation. We see grief not as failure, but as sacred rupture. We understand that what breaks us may also be what opens us to dimensions of life we could never have known otherwise. This is not a metaphor. It is a reality that people discover in the fire of their own experience. When we allow our pain to shape us symbolically, it gives birth to new vision. It gives birth to humility, to compassion, to depth that cannot be faked. Meaning does not arise when wounds are erased. It arises when they are integrated, when they are honored, when they are allowed to speak their strange and ancient wisdom. In this way, the deepest pain becomes the deepest teacher. The wound becomes the source of soul. We live in an age where silence feels dangerous. The moment stillness enters, we reach for something to fill it. A screen, a sound, a task, anything to avoid the echo of our own depth. Distraction has become a lifestyle, not an accident. Distraction offers relief, but it does not offer restoration. It numbs, but it does not nourish. It gives us stimulation, but not significance. The mind is busy, but the heart is untouched. We scroll through endless content and feel more alone than ever. This hunger for stimulation hides a deeper hunger for meaning. Beneath the constant noise is a soul longing to be heard. Beneath the curated performance is a person longing to feel real. Distraction is not just entertainment. It is escape from the sacred ache. When we never stop moving, we never meet ourselves. We remain strangers to the very core of who we are. Jung knew that this kind of avoidance is not harmless. It is soul starvation masked as comfort. There's nothing wrong with pleasure. But when pleasure becomes avoidance, when comfort becomes insulation, we begin to drift from the truth of our lives. Meaning cannot be downloaded. It must be encountered. And that encounter begins where distraction ends. We are praised for being productive. We fill our calendars, chase deadlines, and measure our worth by output. But beneath the applause, many feel hollow. Not because they are lazy, but because they are lost in a rhythm that never pauses long enough to ask why. Productivity has become the new spirituality. We confuse movement with meaning. We assume that a full schedule equals a full life, but speed without direction is just disguised anxiety. Without soul, work becomes performance. Without reflection, effort becomes exhaustion. Jung warned that when outer activity replaces inner contact, something vital begins to collapse. The soul does not thrive on speed. It moves slowly. It speaks in whispers. It requires quiet. And in a world that never stops, the soul often gives up trying to be heard. The tragedy is not that we are doing too much. It is that we are becoming disconnected from why we do anything at all. The body is present, but the spirit is absent. The routine is alive, but the heart feels far away. To hear the soul, we must dare to stop. We must make space for what does not shout. We must let go of the addiction to usefulness long enough to remember that meaning is not earned. It is received in presence. We live in a culture that believes everything valuable can be acquired. Knowledge can be bought. Insight can be streamed. Even healing is marketed as a product. But meaning does not work this way. It cannot be packaged. It cannot be owned. Meaning arises through experience. It is something you meet, not something you purchase. It happens in the places you do not control. In silence, in awe. In dreams that arrive without warning and change how you see everything. To encounter meaning, you must be available to it. That means being vulnerable. That means being present without knowing what you will find. That means walking away from the algorithm and returning to your own depths. The soul does not respond to consumption. It responds to attention. When you slow down, when you listen inwardly, when you treat life as sacred instead of efficient, meaning begins to reveal itself. Not all at once. Not on command. But faithfully. Jung knew that the modern world confuses knowledge with wisdom. We believe that understanding something gives it value. But the soul is not moved by explanation. It is moved by participation. You cannot consume your way into a meaningful life. You must live your way there. A symbol is not something we analyze. It is something we enter. It carries layers of meaning that cannot be reduced to a single sentence. It speaks in images that bypass the mind and awaken the heart. When we live with a symbol, it begins to live in us. Carl Jung believed that symbols are how the unconscious communicates what words cannot contain. They are invitations, not explanations. They are living realities that shape us from within when we allow them to guide our attention and our choices. Meaning does not arise when a symbol is explained. It arises when a symbol is honored. When it is carried like a question, not solved like a puzzle. When it becomes a companion in our journey, not a concept on a shelf. To live a symbol is to treat your inner life with reverence. To notice recurring dreams. To reflect on strange images that linger. To ask why a certain story, figure, or object keeps returning to your imagination. These are not distractions. They are messages. The mind wants clarity. The soul wants contact. And the symbol is the meeting ground. It does not give you answers. It gives you direction. And in walking that direction, meaning begins to take root in your life like something quietly and steadily growing. The symbolic attitude is not a belief, it is a posture. It is the willingness to look beneath the surface of events, to treat life as meaningful even when it appears chaotic, to assume that behind the ordinary lies something extraordinary trying to be seen. Carl Jung described this attitude as the key to psychological growth. It is the ability to relate to experience not just factually, but symbolically. To see that a dream is not just the residue of sleep, but a message. That a conflict is not just bad luck, but a mirror. When we cultivate the symbolic attitude, we begin to ask different questions. We stop saying, "Why is this happening to me?" and start asking, "What is this asking of me?" We stop reducing life to data and start reading it like myth. This way of seeing is not naive. It is not a rejection of reason. It is an expansion beyond it. It allows for mystery. It honors complexity. It gives space for the soul to participate in how we interpret the world around us. Transformation does not begin with change. It begins with perception. When we look at our lives through the lens of symbol, we begin to see patterns where before there was only pain. We begin to find meaning where before there was only confusion. Meaning often arrives quietly, not through logic, but through story. Not through reason, but through resonance. Myths, dreams, and synchronicities are not accidents of the imagination. They are expressions of the symbolic life trying to become conscious. Myths carry truths that facts cannot reach. They hold archetypal patterns that repeat across generations. When a myth moves you, it is not because it is old. It is because it is alive in you. It reflects something your soul has always known but could never name. Dreams are not noise. They are personal myths unfolding every night. They speak in images the waking mind forgets how to hear. They offer guidance, warnings, and invitations. They connect the fragments of the day to the deeper pattern of the soul. Synchronicities are moments when the inner and outer worlds speak in unison. A thought followed by a symbol. A longing answered by an encounter. These events do not obey causality. They obey meaning. They remind us that life is not random. It is relational. To ignore these elements is to miss the voice of the unconscious. To attend to them is to begin participating in a deeper conversation. One where life becomes not just something you live, but something that speaks to you as you live it. Most people are taught to shape their lives from the outside in. They chase approval, fit into expectations, and build identities around what seems acceptable. But meaning does not arise when we conform. It arises when we listen inwardly and live outwardly from what we hear. To live from the inside out is not to ignore the world. It is to meet the world with authenticity. It is to let the inner symbolic life guide choices, relationships, and direction. It is to treat your life as a conversation with something greater than yourself. Carl Jung believed that meaning begins when we stop pretending and start becoming. Not by force, but by fidelity to the truth within. That truth may not make sense to others. It may not look like success, but it will feel real. And reality feeds the soul. When you live from the inside out, life stops being a performance. You stop chasing roles and start embodying essence. You begin to follow the rhythms of the self, not the demands of the ego. The world may not always understand, but your soul will feel at home. This is not an escape, it is a return. A return to a center that has been speaking all along. A return to the symbolic thread that connects your moments into a meaningful whole. When you follow that thread, meaning ceases to be a question. It becomes a way of being. Meaning is not something you own. It is not a medal to hang or a title to wear. It is not a treasure to be captured. It is a field you enter. It is a rhythm you learn to dance with. It is a relationship between you and the invisible depth of things. You do not get meaning once and keep it forever. You must return to it again and again. Through reflection, through surrender, through wonder. It grows as you grow. It evolves as you become more whole. It asks for presence, not performance. Carl Jung saw meaning not as a static truth, but as a living process. It is dynamic, it unfolds. It speaks through your dreams, your desires, your conflicts, your questions. To live meaningfully is to participate in that unfolding with reverence. You cannot force it. You can only respond to it. Meaning meets you where you are willing to meet yourself. It speaks when you are quiet enough to listen. It enters when you are humble enough to admit you do not already know. You are not separate from meaning. You are its vessel. When you live as if life is sacred, life begins to speak to you in sacred ways. When you live symbolically, you do not need to chase meaning. You begin to carry it. Beneath the noise of culture, beneath the layers of fear and conditioning, there is something in you that already knows. It does not argue, it does not beg, it waits. It is the part of you that remembers what is real, even when the world forgets. The soul is not confused. It speaks clearly, but not loudly. Its language is symbolic. Its voice is subtle. It does not push. It invites. It reveals what matters through feeling, through longing, through the quiet recognition that something is right without needing to explain why. You do not need to invent your meaning. You need to return to it. You need to clear the distractions and sit with the ache. You need to listen not with your ears, but with your whole being. The answers you seek are already present. They live beneath the surface. Jung believed that when we are disconnected from meaning, we become ill, not just psychologically, but spiritually. Healing begins when we begin to listen inwardly, when we treat our inner life not as noise, but as guidance. The soul is not waiting for you to be perfect. It is waiting for you to be available. When you listen, something ancient awakens. Something wise begins to move. And in that movement, you do not just find meaning, you become part of it. Truth does not always arrive as clarity. Sometimes it comes as an image that lingers, a pattern that repeats, a story that keeps finding its way into your heart. These are not distractions. They are symbols. And symbols never lie to the soul. When you live close to symbol, you begin to see life differently. You recognize meaning in places others overlook. You stop asking for certainty and start trusting the language of intuition. You learn to follow the thread of the invisible with courage and care. This way of living is not easy, but it is real. It strips away the artificial and restores the sacred. It demands honesty with yourself. It demands stillness. But what it gives in return is a sense of rootedness that cannot be taken by circumstance. To live symbolically is not to escape life. It is to enter it more fully, to enter it with eyes that see depth, with a heart that knows every moment is part of a greater pattern. A pattern that is not random, a pattern that is alive. When you walk close to symbol, you stop needing life to explain itself. You begin to experience it as enough, not because it is perfect, but because it is meaningful. And that is what the soul was made for. This journey does not end here. If symbols are the language of the soul, then archetypes are its deep structure. They are not characters in a myth. They are living patterns within you. Forces that shape your thoughts, relationships, fears, and longings. Carl Jung saw archetypes not as theories, but as realities. They are not invented. They are discovered. They move beneath culture, beneath language, beneath time. They are the timeless blueprints through which the soul expresses itself. To understand archetypes is to begin seeing your life as more than personal. It is to realize that what feels unique to you is also eternal. That your wounds, your gifts, your calling, are all part of a larger unfolding story written into the architecture of being. In the next chapter of this series, we will enter this archetypal dimension. We will explore how these patterns reveal themselves in dreams, in choices, and in the people who enter and exit your life. Not as symbols to study, but as energies to embody. The search for meaning does not require more information. It requires deeper perception. You have begun that work. The way forward is not more control, but more surrender. The symbol has opened the door. The archetype will show you the shape of the room,